Hi, it's Katie from Crafting Ruby Dreams and welcome back to my channel. I talk about planners, goal setting, writing, publishing, and getting right with my finances. If you find anything in this video useful, please hit that like button so that YouTube knows to recommend it to others, and also consider hitting the subscribe button and the bell to be notified of when future videos are available. Today, I've got more writing advice for you, and this is specifically about trying out new techniques. In general, I think trying out new techniques is a wonderful thing because it helps you grow as a writer. It builds your toolbox, and these are things that you can implement as you move through your career as a writer, depending on if you're writing a short story or if you're writing a novel. You can use those different tools that are specific for the project that you are working on. I think there are also very specific times when trying out new techniques is very useful. And those are, number one, when you are stuck in the story and all of the techniques that have worked for you in the past are not generating any results. You are just not moving forward for whatever reason, and everything that has been your go-to standby just is not working for you. Then maybe you want to consider changing something up in your process, such as you've been writing at night, so maybe you try writing in the morning, vice versa. Maybe you try writing during sprints to make yourself responsive to a timer, and you can do any length of sprint. I personally, when I do sprints, tend to write for 15 minutes, take a break for 5, and then come back for another 15. That has been what has mostly worked for me in the past. Other people use the more traditional Pomodoro technique of 20 minutes of writing or doing something and 10 minutes break. Your brain is not going to necessarily be responsive. I find 20 minutes too long, and 10 minutes is way too short, but 15 minutes is the sweet spot for me. So experiment. If you are finding that you are responding to a timer, but if you want to test the timing because something is not feeling quite right, do that. In addition to time things, maybe you want to switch up something in your environment. Maybe you listen to music, whether it is classical and completely wholly instrumental. Maybe it is something that you are responding to because of the emotions it generates, matches the emotions that you are trying to write into the story. Maybe it's just a set song or two or three or four that you play on endless loop and just gets you into a particular mindset of I'm writing, I'm focusing. All of those are perfectly valid methods. Other techniques to try that are specifically writing oriented is maybe you jump around in the story when before you have been a linear writer. I remember there was one time I was working on a short story and I was having trouble moving forward in the story, but I could see the end. In fact, I could specifically see the very last sentence. So I wrote down that last sentence, and then I figured out the sentence that came before that, and I literally worked backwards sentence by sentence in order to complete that short story. That would be harder to do with a novel, but it can be done if that is the way your brain is working at that particular moment in time. That is still kind of linear writing, just backwards linear writing, but a lot of people will jump around in the story in that they will write one scene and then they will write a different scene and then they will write a third scene, and then they will weave all of those scenes together at the very end of the project. I have sometimes called that quilting writing because you're taking individual pieces and pulling them together to create a whole out of a pattern that you can see. When you're a linear writer, which means you tend to write from start to finish and no variations, no bopping around in between, that can be harder to switch your brain. But if you're so completely stuck, but you can see a different scene in the story, go for that scene just because that is the scene that you can see. And once you get that scene out of the way, you may be able to just go back to where you had been and continue your linear writing. And it may even be a scene that you'd never include in the book, which again, it's fine, but it gets you into the mechanical habit of writing. Another reason why you might want to try a new technique is because you want to experiment and you actually have the time to do so. So it may be with the form of the story. Maybe you have written novels before and you want to try writing a novella or a short story, and vice versa. Maybe you want to try new genres or subgenre. It could be that you also want to try writing in a different point of view than you typically write in, or you specifically want to write to evoke a certain emotion that you're not necessarily known for. Say you tend to write very solemn, mournful books, which is fine. There are readers out there for that type of book, but it's like you want to like switch things up, and so maybe you try to write humor because you are not known for including humor. I was originally going to go with dark for this example, but there are a lot of dark writers who include humor as a way to break up the tension of their story and break the, not break to like totally break, but to give the reader a breath from the pacing of the story. And so maybe you are a dark writer who's never included humor or anything humorous in your stories before, and you're a little unsure why you're not fully connecting with readers. Maybe you want to experiment with including humor to see if you can get the timing of the pacing down in order to give your readers a breath before they dive back into your story. The third reason, I kind of alluded to this in the previous reason why I think you should try new techniques, is because you are very specifically deciding to move into a new area of storytelling, whether that's the format, say novel versus poetry versus scripts, or you're changing up the length of the story that you are going to write. And so again, moving from novel to short story and vice versa, or novella or epic, and then also switching up genre and subgenre. So all of these are great reasons why you should try new techniques, because the thing is that the techniques for writing a novel are not necessarily going to translate successfully to writing a short story. When you're writing a short story, you have to be very concise and compact and distilled. And if you're used to writing more epic length or just longer novels and having the space and room to describe things, whether that's somebody's emotions, whether that's the setting, whether that's the world building, whatever it is, you have a lot more space in a novel. And so you have to learn how to be very distilled when writing a short story or even a novella. But if you are moving from short stories and novellas and to novels, then you have to learn how to fill that space in a way that still moves the story forward and is not just fluff. Also, when you are changing genres and subgenres, there are certain conventions that you may have to switch up and learn how to master, such as maybe the predominant reader for historicals as opposed to historical romance are typically used to first-person point of view storytelling, and you are used to writing third-person point of view storytelling. So digging deep into a character's head and limiting yourself to just that character if that's what you choose to do, those require honestly, a lot of mental techniques, and then you also have to learn what to look for in the course of the story as you're editing, as to, oh no, that's not the right point of view. So all of those are reasons why I think it's necessary to try new techniques when writing, and those are absolutely appropriate times to try new techniques when writing. That's not an exhaustive list by any means, since there are only 3 points on there, but I was feeling a bit fried when I was writing my script. So if you have any other suggestions as to when it might be appropriate to try new techniques when writing, please drop those in the comments. I also have 2 points of when I think you should not consider trying a new technique when you are writing. The first one is when you are under deadline and you have to turn your story into whoever you have to turn it into. And all of your usual techniques of getting the story done are working. They may not be working optimally, but they are working, and you are seeing progress and you are getting things done. So trying to throw in a new technique may not be the best choice for you at that point in time, because very often trying a new technique means that you are practicing it over and over and over again as you build up a level of proficiency in it. And if you do not have the time and space to work on building your proficiency, it's not the right time to try a new technique. It just really is. If you are under a time crunch, it's not the best time. It really isn't. That being said, I do have a story for you, and this is my experience with trying a new technique. And again, it's not the right time when your usual methods are generating results. That's what I want to emphasize, is if you're under a time crunch and your usual methods are generating results, even if not optimally, just resist the temptation. But this goes back to why you might want to try a new technique, and when your usual things are not generating the results that you need them to generate at all. Back in 2018, I was part of an anthology for holiday romances, and it was for novellas, so it wasn't even that long of a story. It was like 20 to 30,000 words, I think. I think some people may have gone longer, but I was shooting for between 20 and 30,000 words. I had actually written one version of the story already, and I had sent it out to my editor, who I had contracted with, because this was a self-published venture. And so I got my editor's notes back in, I want to say early mid-September, and the project was due to the organizer by, I believe, like November 1st, in order for her to be able to compile everything and get it loaded up onto the retailer sites by December 1st, which was the release date. Something like that. So, like I said, I got my edit notes back mid-September. Mid-October, I realized I had to completely scrap it, because every time I went to work on doing the edits, I had such a visceral reaction of, I did not want to do this. And it wasn't because I disagreed with my editor. I actually really fully agreed with her. But I just did not want to put myself back into that version of the story. It just felt wrong to me. And I had actually gotten good feedback from somebody on it as to the tone. Everybody else disagreed with her, but, and even I was like, okay, I can see your point of why you think it's good to have this particular kind of representation, but it's not right for this particular project. And that's being a good business person, and especially if you're self-publishing, being honest with yourself and being honest with what your readers are going to want from a particular project is so crucial and vital, because you are your own publisher, and so you have to make those hard decisions of, okay, yes, I may have had fun with writing this, and yes, there is a market for this, but is that market my market? So I have about 2 weeks left to turn in something to the organizer. And I was talking with a person who is also helping to organize in a more conceptual way. And so I was talking with her and said, look, I think I need to throw everything out and just write a completely new story. And what she said to me was that I had to promise her before doing that, I had to go listen to the Writing for Your Id workshop by Jennifer Lynn Barnes that was at the RWA conference in 2018. And this was just a few months later, so this was fall of 2018 that all of this was going on. And I said, okay, I can promise that, because I had already heard people talking about it, and how both who had attended the conference program itself and who had listened to it later, and everybody who had been exposed to it at this point were still raving about it. And so I promised Adriana that I would go and listen to the workshop, and I think it's like an hour and 15 minutes long, something like that. So it was a bit of a time commitment, but I just went for a very long walk up my street and back, because it's about an hour or so to do that. And it was life-changing for me. It really, truly was. It was just so many points of, oh. I've recommended this workshop before, and I will continuously recommend this workshop because it had that much of an impact on me. I don't consider myself much of a plotter, but there are times that I have to be. And what I realized with this particular project was that I was going to have to be more plotting oriented to my approach to getting the new version of the story done. And it was a completely new version. I didn't even keep the same characters. The only thing I kept was the title. That was it. I didn't change the title, but I had wholly new characters, wholly new setting, like pretty much everything other than the themes that were supposed to be specific to the anthology, I got rid of. So I spent some time with, okay, what is it that gets me excited as a reader? What are my id points? So I like drew out a quick list of those, and then was able to come up with a story concept. And then what I did was I took Jennifer's points that she made in the Writing for Your Id workshop, and I decided to focus on that. So I took just blank sheets of paper, and then I wrote down, okay, what in this chapter is going to hit these id points, and what about this chapter is going to reflect the theme of the anthology, and how is the romance developing in this chapter. So I basically created an outline for myself for the chapter that I had a worksheet. That's the word I'm looking for. I created a worksheet for myself for every single chapter. So what I did was I filled out the worksheet for chapter 1, and then I wrote chapter 1, because this was the other thing. I had 1 week in order to write this story so that I could turn it into a line editor to review and get it back to me, in order to give me time to go through those edits and then turn it into the organizer. So yeah, major time crunch, but all of my usual techniques up until that had worked for me up until that point had completely failed me. They were completely failing me. So I had to do something new. And so every night I would write a new chapter, and then once I was done writing the chapter, I would fill out the worksheet for the next chapter, and then just repeated the process until I forget how long the initial draft was, but it was within that 20 to 30,000 range, which for a novella, that's actually a big range, but it's still novella length. So somewhere in there was what my final version of that story was. And I turned it into the line editor something like Friday night. She had it back to me on Sunday, and I was able to get the edits that she suggested done and turned into the organizer who is compiling the project. I don't recommend necessarily doing something like that, especially when it's new, but I will say that particular project I think is one of the best projects I've ever written. It is probably one of the most cohesive stories I've ever written. I think it hits a lot more reader expectations than anything I've ever written in romance. And unfortunately, it was the last thing I've written in romance, because that's around the time that things were just falling apart for me for various reasons. And so I haven't had a chance. I have tried to like go back and try to do that, but because I was also trying to do something completely different, I was trying to do a different genre, wasn't quite working for me. And I was also still in burnout, still am to a degree. So I am looking forward to trying this technique on a different project. I don't think I want to try to write it all in 1 week again, because that was just stressful and not something I want to do. But I think the idea of having a worksheet like that to work from chapter to chapter or even scene to scene helps create a cohesive story, at least for me, because my problem in the past has always been I've been relatively slow with writing, and so once I got faster with writing, I was able to write more cohesive stories. But even with novels, you're still generally doing that at least over a month's time, and so you'll forget stuff that you had early in the novel when you're later in the novel. And that doesn't even mean if you're writing linearly versus jumping all over the place. When you're writing later parts of the novel, like when you're writing on day 30, you are not going to necessarily remember what you wrote on day 1 and 2. That's what I mean. So, so that's another thing, is that when I realized that writing slow was not working for me because I was just having to spend so much time in edits and correcting all of these continuity issues, I tried a new technique of trying to write faster so that I could have a more cohesive storyline. So those are some of my experiences with trying new techniques, and some reasons why I think you might want to consider trying a new technique when writing, or maybe not trying a new technique. Seriously, there are times that you just have to resist the temptation. But if you have any other suggestions for trying new techniques, or even just techniques that you think everybody should try at least at some point in their writing career, please drop those in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have found anything in this video useful, please hit the like button so that YouTube knows to recommend it to others. Please also hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified of when future videos are available. Also, it is October of 2020, and if you are a US citizen, please exercise your right to vote in this election as safely as you are able to when you are able to. Thank you so much, and may all your dreams be Ruby dreams. Bye-bye.